Good evening and God bless you. I'm Father Joseph Hazar, pastor of St. Thecla Orthodox Church in Richmond, Texas, and I'm your host for the Apostles for Jesus English program. I'd like to welcome all of you, the viewers, this evening. Thank you very much for watching. If you're enjoying this program, please subscribe to the channel and like and share the video so that in your own little way, you can become an apostle for Jesus. Today's guest on the show is Dr. Eugenia Constantinou, and she is a scholar with a law degree from Pepperdine University, a master's degree from Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Seminary, and from Harvard University School of Divinity. And she has a PhD in New Testament and History of Biblical Interpretation from Université Laval in Quebec City, Canada, as well as other degrees too numerous to mention. She has worked as a lawyer and is an author of several books, including Thinking Orthodox and The Crucifixion of the King of Glory, as well as others. She has several podcasts and travels the country giving retreats on various topics. She is a presbytera, or priest wife, and a mother. I consider Presbytera Eugenia a good friend, and I'm honored to have this opportunity to speak with her in front of all of you today. So welcome, Presbytera Eugenia. Today's topic is one that she does not generally speak on, and that's, let's see, I think we have some technical difficulties here, so give me just 1 second. We'll get her on here very shortly. But today's topic is one that she generally does not speak on very often. We usually hear Dr. Eugenia Constantinou speak on issues concerning the scriptures and thinking Orthodox, the ethos of Orthodox thinking. And so today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk about issues concerning women in the family, in society, and in the church. So it's going to be an interesting topic, a lot of very important topics that we're going to cover here tonight. And I think we're going to try and clear up some misunderstandings and miscommunications concerning the church's view on women. So as we're waiting for her to get on the program here. She's just having an issue on her end.
Good evening, Father Joseph.
Dr. Annan, how are you?
Good, thank you. While we are waiting for Dr. Jeannie, let's talk a little bit about women in the church. I think this is a very interesting topic for Christians and non-Christians, for people who believe in the Bible, people who believe in anything else, because women is half of the society, and it has a long history about the place of women and the role of women in all societies throughout centuries. But I think that women in the church has a very unique position and character. And we know that in the Orthodox Church, the best one who will present women to the whole world is the Theotokos of the Mother of God, because she is the one who, because of her, the fullness of time was possible, and because of her, the divine incarnation for the divine dispensation was also possible. Without the Holy Virgin, there will be no fullness of time, and the incarnation will not be possible. So that's why when it comes to the church, people say, especially in the 20th century and this century, about feminism, about we have to seek equality between women and men. Actually, in the church, there is no such things, because they are equal. If we go to the Bible 20 centuries ago, when Paul says in In Christ there is no male or female. That means from the beginning of the Christianity, from day one, from the Pentecost, women were equal to men, and that is very, very important to understand. However, because both were created in the image and likeness of God, but we have to understand that the role of man is different than the role of woman, in not only in the church, only in also in our life, in the social life, and all aspects of our daily life. So we cannot make woman be a man and the man becomes a woman. God did not create two men or two women, did not create people who are very similar. So we welcome Dr. Jeannie. Welcome back.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry
Okay, I will
had
leave you.
difficulty connecting.
Thank you. I will leave you with Father Joseph, and I will join you at the end with the. I hope
Okay.
you don't have a microphone for the sound.
I don't know. I can't.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's
hear me?
okay.
All right. Very good. Very good.
So, Dr. Jeannie, welcome. I gave you a very nice introduction. It's always awkward to say nice things about people to their face. So I'm glad you weren't there for it.
That's better then.
But I did tell everybody that I consider you a friend. I had you for a retreat in my former parish, and it was a great opportunity to get to know you. And now I mentioned that you're speaking on a topic that you don't generally speak about. At least I've never heard you speak about, and that is the role of women in society, in the family, and in church. I'm sure you've spoken about this topic in one way or another, and we've had some conversations about it. But also, you're usually speaking about the thinking Orthodox and scriptural issues. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
Yes, Father.
First, I wanted to point out that we're going to clear up, hopefully, some misunderstandings and misconceptions concerning the church's view on women. I think there's an idea sometimes of what the church believes on things. And so we'll look at scripture and the fathers and try and clear some things up. Yes. Some people feel like the church is patriarchal and that women are second-class citizens in traditional Christian religions. What these people fail to understand is what Christ and later St. Paul and others in the church did for women in the first century. Can you describe maybe briefly what it was like for women before Christ versus after the Christian understanding of women?
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, Father, for asking the question, because that is a misconception. Somehow we compare what we think the church ought to be like with what we think the rest of society is like, in which women can hold virtually any position in politics or in law, whatever career they want, practically is open to them. So we look at that and we think, oh, the church is sexist or the church is patriarchal. It doesn't allow women to use their gifts. Well, the fact is that Christ was a great liberator of women, not the oppressor of women. And this idea that somehow Christianity is oppressive, all you have to do is go to other countries and look at how they treat women. Women have full equality in the church and in virtually every single way. So what was life like for women in Judaism? We could go ahead and start with that. Women, when St. Paul says that in Christ there is neither male nor female, that is because in Judaism, there were tremendous distinctions between men and women. Men had different religious requirements. Men had different prayers and religious obligations. Women had other ones there were fewer, and women were really confined to the home. They could not exercise any sphere of influence outside of the home practically. That was a very rare thing for a woman to have any business dealings, certainly in Judaism, any dealings with the outside world. She couldn't really have a public life. The only influence that she could exert was within the home with her own children. And Jewish laws were very specific about what was required of women. And mostly it was to keep themselves from becoming a defiling source to men by touching them or something that a man would touch if they were menstruating, for example. So this idea that somehow that we look at it with Jesus, of course, he had female followers. Now, well, he didn't choose one to be among the 12. That's true. He had men for those positions, but he had women disciples. That was unheard of back in those days. Women simply were not disciples of rabbis. Rabbis had nothing to do with women. Rabbis did not even speak to their own wives in public, let alone have a woman as a disciple. Even today, among
And
Orthodox
just to
Jews,
clarify, he had women disciples and also women apostles, but perhaps
yes,
why he didn't have one of the 12 women, maybe one to avoid scandal, and also when he sends them out to do the apostolic work, that could have been dangerous because we know 11 of the 12
it was.
apostles ends up being killed. So maybe out of respect for
Yes.
women, their apostleship was maybe looked a little different.
Well, the thing is, there were women apostles. Mary Magdalene, even though we give her the title equal to the apostles, in the early church, she and other female disciples of the Lord were considered apostles because they were eyewitnesses to the resurrection. And that's what made you an apostle. Today, we confine that term to the 12. But in the early church, if you were a follower of Jesus Christ and an eyewitness to his resurrection, you were literally called an apostle. And of course, we see them. Saint Fortini, we see Mary Magdalene, and others go out literally doing the same work as men. But for whatever reason, the Lord chose 12. Now, that of course has to do with the 12 tribes of Israel. That's a historic connection to Israel. For whatever reason, and of course, it is the apostles who become the leaders of the church in the sense that the bishops today occupy that position as successors of the apostles. So women were never presbyters and they were never bishops. So that's why that particular role in the church is restricted to men. But that's the decision of the Lord, not of us, not of the church, as though the church was something separate from Christ. So the fact is, women were considered unclean, at least, a third of the month. They were not allowed, they usually were never educated. They didn't have freedom. They couldn't choose whom they married except under certain circumstances. Their father decided whom they would marry, and then they were under their husband's control. So there was always very strict restrictions on women in Judaism, and also even for many and pagan religion. Women didn't have the kind of freedom of action, or certainly they weren't considered equal to men the way that women are in the church. So we don't have separate sacraments just for women, or separate prayers just for women, or a separate spirituality just for women. And that was the case in Judaism. We don't have that in the church. So men and women have the same spirituality, to the same preparation for communion, the same everything. So for anyone to say that women are not equal, then I have to ask you, what about the vast majority of people in the church who are not men, who are not priests? Are you saying that they're nothing? That there's something unequal about them, that they're not full participants in the church because they weren't called to the priesthood? So we have to look at these things differently.
There are so few priests.
Yeah, exactly. If you have a parish, you have a parish with 200 or 300 families and one priest or two priests. What about all the rest of the men? They're nothing. They don't count. They don't contribute because they're not a priest. So we have to really change our attitudes. And we have to remember that this attitude that is infiltrating the church and affecting us, and women, when they absorb this, they become angry as if they have been wrong or deprived. That is from the world. And the church is not of this world, just as Christ was not of this world. So we have to get rid of the values of the world and the ideas of the world if we really want to be followers of Jesus Christ. Because prior to the Christian faith, a woman had to be married, whether she was a Jew or she was a pagan. If you weren't married, you had no options except to be a prostitute. That's the truth. Because women didn't go out and get jobs and things like this. Now, there were enterprising women who started little businesses or things like this, but you had to get married, and usually your father chose your husband, whether you liked it or not, and you were stuck with that person. And by the way, in Judaism, a woman could never initiate a divorce, even if the man was abusive. He had to be the one to get the divorce. And that is still the case in Orthodox Judaism. And a lot of women are left in very unhappy marriages and unable to get out of them and unable to marry because the husband, the man, has all of the power and the authority. That was not the case in the Christian faith. Everything was always equal for men and women. So women had the option not to marry and instead to become consecrated virgins, to have a life of the mind, to have a life in the service of others, to have a life of prayer. That was unheard of in the ancient world. So this is something, it was an option. If you chose not to get, let's say you didn't want to get married, you don't have to be married. And if you weren't forced to marry someone, if you didn't want to marry someone in the church. So there were, to consider the church as sort of an institution that oppressed women is historically inaccurate. That's for sure.
Yeah, and so the priesthood is obviously something very special. It's a gift that God has given mankind. But I would not ever consider myself, especially, nor any priest, higher than the Theotokos, who is really the greatest of all mankind after our Lord Jesus Christ. So our Lord is born of a woman. He honors and obeys his mother. That's huge. It's not just like he used her for a way to come into the earth.
That's true.
He obeys her and honors her and loves her.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
He makes, as you said, women his disciples and apostles. He speaks with the Samaritan woman, as you mentioned, Saint Photini, in the longest recorded dialogue between Christ and any other person in the New Testament. And he's seeking her salvation, showing really how much he loves her. He praises multiple widows, like the widow with the two mites and the Canaanite woman for her faith. Mm-hmm. And he heals many sick women. So, okay, let's set the record straight. Jesus Christ, who is God is telling us that women hold a very special place. And so anybody who thinks that Christianity demeans women in any way, just go to the source, which is our Lord Jesus Christ, and you'll see very clearly that he does not.
Correct, Father.
So, yes. So now, if we can, now that we've established that, transition into family life a little bit. St. Paul says in his epistle that we read in our wedding service, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as the church submits herself to Christ. So, first of all, can you explain what that means? And second of all, can you separate that from the very next line?
Okay, so the first thing is, it doesn't begin with that. Just a little minor correction here, Father. It says the epistle reading begins with this line, this verse. Submit yourselves to one another out of reverence for Christ.
Yes, thank you.
Each of them, husbands and wives, are to submit to each other. And anyone who has a healthy marriage understands what that's like. There are times when one of them takes the lead or takes responsibility for something because the other cannot at that time, or vice versa. And that's why we have the crowns and we exchange them. It's not just the husband's crown or just the wife's crown. They are exchanged because that's what we mean by this. They take on the role that is necessary and they submit to each other's judgment and consideration and love and everything else. So after that, it says, wives, submit yourselves to your husbands as to the Lord. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Now, people don't like this idea of submission. Well, again, it's not just for the wife. It's for both. That's what it says. Now, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. who laid himself down for her. Who, in other words, husbands are called to die for their wives. It's interesting. Wives are not asked to die for their husband because that's what Christ did to establish the church. He died for us. So the level of responsibility of the husband, of sacrificial love, is higher than for the wife. So for us to say, well, but husbands don't have to submit. And this idea of if men think that they're the boss and they're supposed to order the wife and she has to submit, how unhealthy is that? That's not
Anyone
a marriage.
Anyone who's married knows that that's not the case.
That's not going to give you a happy, healthy marriage. Then the wife can easily say, well, you're supposed to love me the way Christ loved the church, which means you have to be willing to go out and die for me. So how about that, buddy? You know, this idea that the husband gives all the orders and the wife just takes them and is a little robot or a little slave. That's not what the gospel is, or what the epistle of St. Paul there is telling us. It's supposed to be a life of mutual, and also because in the hymns of the wedding, we sing about the martyrs. People don't sometimes think about that because they're watching the married couple go around the table. We say, holy martyred saints. We are singing to the martyrs because that is what married life is like. It is a martyrdom of the self, a denial of the self-will, a willingness to become submissive to your partner in life, husband or wife. And this is a beautiful thing. This is how we learn humility, how we learn the denial of our self-will. So this idea that we shouldn't submit to one another. So it's not just on the woman to submit, it's on the men to submit to their wives too. And ask many men how often they have to do that if they want to have a healthy relationship. So this idea that somehow just wives have to submit, this is very Protestant, by the way. That's a very Protestant thing that has kind of crept into the church from these fundamental, sometimes people who've come out of a Protestant mentality and they assume because Orthodoxy, they think it's conservative. It's not conservative, it's traditional. You know, the Greeks have that saying for it, Father. The husband is the head and the wife is the neck. But there's a lot of truth to that. The neck turns the head. Women have a lot of authority, a lot of persuasive powers in the house, a lot of influence in the home, but not if they demand a certain kind of, I don't know if we want to say rights or respect or something. This is something that is done out of love. So at any rate, I don't know if that's what you were talking about.
Just so that people know that this isn't Dr. Jeannie or Father Joseph's opinion, St. John Chrysostom writes, for what sort of union is that where the wife trembles before her husband? And what sort of pleasure will the husband himself enjoy if he dwells with his wife as a slave and not as with a free woman? And St. John in the 4th century is talking about this. So this isn't a new idea for us. By the way, this is a great book for anyone out there. The Mystery of Marriage, a Fellowship of Love by Hieronym Gregorius. I just thought I gained nothing by the sale of this book, but I think it's a great book, and I wanted to share that with people.
That's beautiful, Father. Yes.
Then can you explain then what it means that the husband is the head of the wife? What should that look like?
You know, well, I think what it looks like depends upon the couple, and it also depends upon, we could say, the season in life in their marriage. So when we say the husband is the head of the wife, does not mean he's the boss of her. So if it tells us that the husband is supposed to love his wife like his own flesh, then he's not going to be abusive. You don't abuse your own flesh, your own body. Mm-hmm. So when Chrysostom actually talked about that too, I'm glad you brought up Chrysostom, because of all the fathers of the church, he probably has the most balanced view of married life, or certainly talks about it more than any other father, because he was preaching to a city congregation. So he says the husband, somebody has to be in charge in the household, and there has to be some kind of headship. This is how he explains it. But he says it is of the slightest. The fact is that we really shouldn't be looking at that. who's in charge, who's the boss, who's the head, because then it becomes a power struggle. So really, for any healthy marriage, both husband and wife will recognize the headship of the other, even though it says, there in the scriptures that the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Somebody has to be the head. So he's comparing it to a body, right? Christ is the head of the church, husband is the head of the wife. But that doesn't mean that they're in conflict. That means that they're harmonious, that they work together as a body. So I don't think we ought to press these analogies so far as to distort it, which would be to suggest that somehow the husband makes all the decisions and the wife is supposed to be submissive. There was this trend, I don't know if it's still around in the Protestant world, of the servant wife kind of thing. And they thought this was wonderful. Oh, honey, whatever you say, you make all the decisions. I'm just here to obey. And they think that that's the model of a Christian wife. It isn't. The Christian wife creates her relationship with her husband. She can express her opinion. She helps in the decisions. He doesn't make just big decisions without her approval and consent. Because if you don't, you're not going to have a happy, healthy marriage. And so this was known.
If we saw a person where the head and the body were not cooperating with each other, we would think it was an illness.
That would be a problem.
maybe mental illness, maybe some other kind of illness.
That's right.
When the body and the head don't communicate together, that's a problem.
That's right.
So
that's right.
I had moving on a little bit to talk about kind of women's place in society. I remember I had somebody email me at one point, and they were interested in Orthodoxy, and but first they wanted to test me and see what the church thought about certain things. And this particular person said, well, would you allow women to be educated? And I said, well, of course, women should be educated and they can even work. I mean, go figure. And this person...
Wow, thank you. Oh, my God.
So I was...
somebody even asked that question. Yeah.
Well, ahead, yes. Father. And so they pretty much told me that I was wrong and that they would not join the church. And I said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way.
Okay, right.
But and I may have dodged a bullet on that one. But what is the Orthodox precedent for women to be educated and to work? Okay,
let's start with this. Anybody who asks that question, you definitely dodged a bullet. They don't belong in the church because they're of this mentality that women are, as you started out saying, this idea that women are second-class citizens, and we are not. The church doesn't do anything differently for women, whether it is confession or communion or prayers or anything else. So we are equal to men in every respect. And if we can't become priests or deacons, fine, but that neither do most of the men. And there's a lot of men who would love to be priests and they're disqualified, let's say because they've been married before. And the church doesn't say, oh, but we're going to ordain you anyhow because you're a man. Okay, but we won't ordain her because she's a woman. Has nothing to do with that. And these narrow ideas, especially about education, I can't believe that I'm hearing this. There is, Father, I will say, a tiny little fringe group among some Orthodox. I don't mean this as a put down, but it's coming from converts who came out of a fundamentalist Protestant, and they kind of figured out that Orthodoxy is historically the original church, but they bring their Protestant mentality, and there are some who are saying after high school, women should not go. I've heard about this. I heard this a few times in the last couple of years, and it's alarming to me. I'm hoping that in time, they will become more mature. But within the church, we have never said women cannot be educated. Again, that was Judaism. Judaism doesn't educate women because they're supposed to just stay home and take care of children. Well, that is something most women want to do. They want to get married and they want to be able to raise children. And some of them want to remain in the workforce and others want to stay home with their kids. That's your choice. And especially as a married couple, that's something that you decide together. But this idea that women cannot be educated, this never happened in the past, even, within the church. As a matter of fact, in the Church of Alexandria in around the year 200, when Origen became the main teacher of the Church of Alexandria, they were educating, the Christians were educating both boys and girls. So that is a very ancient tradition in the church. Now, historically speaking, women always received less education than men. And that's because men had careers often outside the home, in government or something like that, in the public sphere. Women never had those kinds of opportunities in society, so it was considered less important. But in many cases, girls were also educated. So this idea that women cannot be educated is just a crock, and I hope it disappears from even among the people who call themselves Orthodox and think that that's normal. Women,
so
as a matter of fact,
saints that were educated in the Orthodox Church.
Of course, one of the most famous is Saint Catherine, who was called Pansophy, all wise, and others. And I have this little icon over here. We had women, we had women historians, women hymnographers. So these are the saints. There's a Orthodox Women's Association called Orthodox Women in Healing Ministries, and they are often, not all of them, you don't have to be a physician or a nurse to belong to this group, but here their patron saints are Saint Irmoni, Saint Philonella, and Saint Zenaida, and these were first century women saints who were
the daughters of Saint Philip, I believe.
Yeah, they were, well, a couple of them were, but not the third one. And they were a physician and a psychologist, and I can't remember what the last one was, maybe a pharmacist, but she's holding like a little medicine box, like some of the pharmacists. So like Saint Anastasia, who was a pharmacist, Saint Anastasia of Rome. So, this idea that women weren't educated and they can't be educated, why? I mean, if a woman decides that she doesn't want a higher education and she wants to get married and raise a family, that's a beautiful thing. If she wants to educate herself, that's also a beautiful thing. The church doesn't take a position on that. Women aren't supposed to be educated. So that's kind of nonsense there, Father.
Yeah. So then women holding jobs, you kind of spoke about that briefly, but I think even in Scripture, there are women who worked. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Saint Lydia was a seller of purple. The very first Christian of Europe was Saint Lydia, and Saint Paul baptized her, and she's described as a seller of purple. So she was a businesswoman. She was, a merchant, and we don't know why. We don't know if she was married. We don't have these kinds of details are not spelled out in the Scriptures. But women did do work outside the home. Even if you look at Proverbs, the very last chapter of the book of Proverbs, that's Jewish, and that is Old Testament. It describes the ideal wife, and it describes her as spinning well into the night. It describes her as locating a field and buying it. So it describes her as engaged in certain transactions as a businesswoman, earning extra money for her family. That's what it's describing there. So this idea that women cannot work outside the home, that's a bunch of nonsense. Women have the same kinds of gifts that men have. They have the same brain. We have different talents. We have talents to be used in the service of the church. And how are we to use our talents in the service of the church or of humanity in general if we cannot be educated? Because it requires an education to do many of the things that people wish to do today. If a woman wants to serve as a midwife or even to go into agriculture, to be on somebody's farm, it's helpful to have an education. So people can be very successful without one, and they can have a wonderful career. But certainly these things are not closed off to women. Christ never treated women like that, like they weren't valued. Let's take another example, of course. The best example, probably in the New Testament, is Mary and Martha. Martha's there busy working in the kitchen. She's getting annoyed because her sister is sitting and listening to the teaching of the Lord. That, sitting on the floor at Jesus's feet, is the description of a disciple. The teacher sat on a chair or a bench, and the disciples sat on the floor and listened, or sat on the ground and listened to the teacher. So Jesus praises her for learning. He praises her for that action. So you can't tell me that the Lord disfavors women getting an education. And if somebody has a different opinion, then they're not following the example of the Lord. Well, what can we say about that? They're pig-headed and stubborn, and there are men like that because they really wish to feel superior to women. And it's sad to see that, but there are men who are proud of being a man. Well, you know what? You get no points for being born a man. And that doesn't give you any special privileges. And in fact, that sort of attitude that you have toward women will keep you out of the kingdom of heaven, because that's not the kind of attitude. An attitude of superiority over anyone else is an attitude of pride that deprives us of the kingdom of heaven. And women who think that they're being more faithful.
Yes, as the Lord said to the Jews, don't pride yourselves on the fact that you're sons of Abraham, for I can raise these
because you're born
sons of
that
Abraham
way
from these stones.
That's right. And women who think that they're being more pious or more devout because they're just, decided that they're going to, even against it with perhaps their own desires, they're just going to not be educated because that's what the church stands for. They're wrong. Okay. And that's really not making the best use of your talents. We can look at that parable of the talents also. What has God given us? And what does he expect us to do with our talents? People have remarkable talents that they can use in the service of the church and of other human beings. And for us to say that half of humanity shouldn't use their talents, shouldn't develop them, shouldn't be trained, shouldn't be educated because they're born a woman is nonsense, absolute nonsense.
And if for no other reason, a woman who wants to stay at home and raise children, which by the way is a beautiful thing and a beautiful calling.
Yes, it is.
If that's what she chooses. If for no other reason, I think a woman should be educated to help educate her children as well. Because
that's right.
I'll tell you, it's not easy to raise children, and you have to help them after school. Both, I think, the husband and the wife, the father and mother, both have to help with the education of their children.
That's
and if you're not educated yourself, it's very difficult to raise your children.
How can you homeschool your own children? How can you homeschool your own children when you barely, got out of high school yourself? You're not qualified. You're not doing right by your children. So,
and I'm glad that I'm asking just the right questions to rile you up, Presbytera, because I like to know exactly how you feel. Well, so here's another interesting thing. You mentioned marriage, of course, and that women were not allowed in Judaism and some other pagan religions to choose their husbands, maybe in very unique circumstances. However, there's something unique that happens in Christianity, which is women get to choose to not be married at all.
That's right.
And we see that with a number of saints. The patron saint of my parish, Saint Thecla, for example, was engaged. We see Saint Catherine decides not to get married. Saint Barbara.
Lots of saints, lots of women saints chose not to marry, and sometimes were even killed by their fathers because they chose not to marry. So that's, or they became Christians or something. Yeah, that's really common.
But look at the beauty too of how much the Lord loves these women. There are many times that men try to take their maidenhood, and the Lord violently stopped those men from doing that. So this is something that He's blessed for women to choose whether or not they're going to be married. And it's not just for them to travel and enjoy life. Of course, these women gave their lives to Christ. It was a different path to salvation. But for the first time ever, they really got to choose that on their own and decide that they were going to offer their life to Christ as opposed to get married.
That's right. It's a very different life, but they had at least that option. And as men have had that option, So,
but the important thing is that God is giving them this option, which shows that He trusts their judgment and allows them to kind of direct their own lives.
No, that's
I want to
like
bring up real quickly. Yes. Sorry, go ahead, Presbytera.
I was going to say, I like what you said, because the point here is when women sort of compare their lives today and they look at how women used to live in the past, women today have many more options because society is much more open to women having jobs outside the home, being educated, being involved in the public sphere in a lot of ways. And that's simply because of, frankly, our modern conveniences. It used to be that somebody had to stay home and, basically run the house because there was so much work at home. Everything had to be done by hand. There was no refrigeration, no freezer, no drive-through to get meals and things like this, no electricity. I mean, if you can imagine what was involved in running a house and you got married, somebody had to stay home, and the logical person to stay home was the wife, because she was the one who was pregnant, had children, had to breastfeed, and all of these things. So women simply didn't have available to them the kinds of opportunities that they have today. So it's not that women couldn't work outside the home because they weren't allowed to. It's that they didn't have the opportunity because so much time was expended, in simply keeping house. Father, there was a huge problem with married priests in Western Europe under the Catholic Church. Now, the Catholic Church was telling people, even though it was against the decision of the Council of Nicaea, they were requiring men to be celibate. Most of the priests in Western Europe, nonetheless, got married, or they were living with a woman and they were not married. And the reason for that was because it was quite impossible to live without somebody taking care of you, taking care of the home, making sure that the fire was kept on, making sure that dinner was made. There was so much work involved in home. For a man to be able to go out and work, somebody needed to be home. And that's just a reality.
Say, as a father and husband, I want to really express how difficult it is to do that, to stay at home for a number of reasons. One, it's a lot of hard work. And two, it's very repetitive. It never ends. And number three, it's thankless a lot of times because we forget to thank our wives because we just expect that we need to eat, we need the house to be clean, we need all these things.
That's right.
And I don't know if you ever used to watch I Love Lucy, but there was an old episode where Lucy and Ricky decide to switch jobs, and he's going to stay home and take care of the house, and she'll go to work.
Yeah.
And he realizes how difficult that is. So a man would really be a fool to.
That's right. That's right. To think
put
that
down
she
a
has
woman's work at home.
That's right. She's staying home all day. Just leave him home for one day with one toddler and see whether or not you'd rather be working outside the home if you think her life is easy at the home, because it's exhausting. It really is. Yeah. So
I want to talk for a second, Presbytera, about the feminist movement, the modern day feminist movement, because I'm not a history major. I don't know a lot about it. I know a little bit about it, but maybe initially it was even well-intentioned. Maybe it was a response to the poor treatment of women. But just like Protestantism, I mean, they left Rome for good reason, I think, in some cases. Yes. But then they threw the baby out with the bathwater. So feminism, maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they started off well-intentioned. But ultimately, it turned into something very destructive to women, in my opinion. Can you talk about that for a moment?
Well, yes. Luckily, I'm old enough to remember that movement from the 1970s, when women were literally, like, they took a cue from the anti-draft movement of Vietnam War, where men used to burn their draft cards, for your younger listeners. So women were burning their bras in public, and that was their symbol of their liberation. So, yeah, that's how it started. I think it started, and at the beginning, I have to tell you, they really did. It really was needed in many ways, because women were excluded from a lot of opportunities. There's a very interesting movie about the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who became one of the most liberal justices on the Supreme Court. But she went to law school and she could not get a job. And the same thing happened to another Supreme Court justice, the first woman Sandra Day O'Connor went to Stanford Law School, and then she couldn't get a job because that was the 1960s, and they said, well, we'll hire you as a legal secretary. She was an attorney. So even when I went to law school, only a third of our class was women. And when I graduated, there were men who said, oh, women shouldn't be lawyers. And I had some comments directed my way as an attorney in the 1980s. So yes, there was a need for this movement. As usually happens when there's a social movement, it tends to become extreme. One of the main arguments was that women should get equal pay for equal work. And the fact is, women did not receive the same wages as men in those days. And I remember my parents talking about this, and my parents were not in favor of it. And I remember my father saying, well, a woman's going to come along, a single woman, she's going to take a job from a man who has to feed a family. You see, that was the attitude. They didn't say, well, this is a job. This is what a person should be paid, whether you're a man or a woman. The idea was there was this assumption that a man is supporting a family and he ought to be paid more than a woman. We don't have those assumptions anymore. But that kind of movement is why, for those reasons, people felt as a basis, on the basis of fundamental fairness, that women ought to be paid the same as a man doing the same job. So not too many people opposed that notion. When it started to get a little bit askew is when they wanted to be included in things which required perhaps the changing of standards to simply be inclusive. Then that's a different matter. But the feminist movement began to take things to a far. One of the things that I remember from that time was a kind of anti-man. We don't need a men. An attitude toward demeaning men, and that shouldn't have been part of it, but it was. And this idea that we don't need men and men are no good, and this kind of a thing was a distortion, I think, of what God gave us. And God did make us equal, because it says in Genesis that male and female, he created them in his image and likeness. There is no distinction. And the creation of woman in Genesis chapter 2, when she's taken out of the rib of Adam, she is taken out of the same stuff as Adam. She's not created out of some other substance, but exactly his same substance, and from his side, to stand alongside him as an equal partner. That's what that represents. So when it says that she's a helpmate, that doesn't mean that she's a servant. It means that they work together. So I don't know what you were asking necessarily about feminism, Father.
Yeah, so the feminist movement kind of as a something that ended up hurting women instead of helping them.
In some ways, yes, because a lot of women in those days became very proud. I'll tell you how it hurt women, at least from my perspective. Women wanted to be like men, and they began cussing like men. It used to be, not so long ago, that women were considered more refined. They were responsible for raising the children in the home. Women almost never used vulgarity, and they weren't promiscuous. They didn't sleep around, and men respected that. They wouldn't marry a woman who was promiscuous. And then they began saying during the women's movement, I cuss like any man, and they were proud of it. And they began to sleep around and become sexually promiscuous. And this led to a lot of abortions. It led to children being born out of wedlock, and instability, social instability. So this idea that to be equal to a man, you have to be as immoral as a man is ridiculous. But that is how they interpreted equality. It was really a distortion. So it started out, as you said, Father, correctly, as fairness, to have opportunities, equal opportunities for women, for education, for jobs and things like this, and equal pay. But women decided that if they're going to be equal to a man, they're going to show it in the worst possible way. And they did. And I think our society hasn't recovered from that.
And to add to that, women and men are equal, as we said, but they're not the same. And they have different gifts and different strengths. And I think that's something that kind of got lost, to the point where I think we arrived today. I don't think they're completely inseparable,
Yeah.
where genders are being mixed in a
That's
way
right.
that's
That's right.
completely unhealthy. And I think the whole thing moved women away
Yep.
from God because of this perception that Christianity is sexist. Maybe I could be wrong about that. I don't know. But I want to move a little bit into the church, looking at the Orthodox Church now. And, back when you were growing up, and even when I was growing up, most Orthodox Christians in America were, we call them cradle Orthodox Christians. We've had so many beautiful converts come into the faith, which we're very thankful for.
Yes.
But Orthodoxy was very ethnic when we were growing up, and people were pretty much the same. From parish to parish, it varied whether you were Russian or Ukrainian or Greek or Lebanese, Syrian. But now we have parishes where women in the parishes are either like Orthodox feminists, or on the other hand, like the traditional stay-at-home moms. And maybe it's because of social media, or maybe it's just the times we're living in, but people seem like they have to pick an extreme to fit in. And one thing I've noticed is, I notice this with the male saints, but also with the female saints, is the female saints are so different. You mentioned they're different from one another. I'm not comparing them to the men, but from one another. So you mentioned Mary and Martha, who were sisters, and they're completely different mentalities. You have Saint Olga, the new Saint Olga of Alaska. You have Saint Maria of Paris. Yes, and you have so many different. You have like Saint Cassiany, who I named my daughter after. She's such a spitfire. I mean, she was. She let the emperor have it. So you have these. So I think women feel like they have to fit into a box. They're either like super liberal Orthodox and they have to push for women's ordination and this and that, or on the other end, they can't work. They have to stay home pregnant and barefoot, as the saying is. So is it possible for women to be individuals as Orthodox Christians and to be their own person and not have to fit into one of these boxes?
Yes, and I wish they would, by all means, because each of us has been given certain gifts by God. You have a talent for music, or you have a talent for speech, or you have a talent for writing or art or whatever. Use your talents, develop them for the glory of God. If you feel called to stay at home and raise your children, let's say you do that. That is the most difficult thing. I was at church a few weeks ago, and a woman was there with 5 daughters from like 7 to 1. And I said, oh my God. I looked at this, and she was in church with her husband. And I'm telling you, I felt like saying, you're my hero. I could never do that. I mean, I suppose I would if it was my calling in life. But I'm looking at that, knowing how difficult it is to raise small children. But you're going to raise them, and then they're going to be gone. What's next? So it's okay. It's perfectly okay. As a matter of fact, it's a great thing. If you can stay home and be there for your children and raise your children yourself and be able to do all the things that you need to do to be present for them when they're school age. But then they grow up and they leave the house. You can still have a life, a second career after that, but you're not relegated to stay at home and fulfill some kind of gender role that's been imposed by know-it-alls in the church. Nor do you have to be, if you believe that women are equal to men, as I do, nor do you have to ascribe to some of these feminist notions that are equally extreme, that women should be priests or women should be deacons who liturgize alongside with the priest. That's also not Orthodox. So absolutely, we each have our own calling, our own path, and it's up to us. I think it's good if you can discern that before you get married, what you think you want. Find a supportive spouse who wants to help you. And by the way, this is not just for women, but men as well, to be married to a woman who respects him, who encourages him, who supports him in following his own dreams and making use of his own talents. We need that for wives to do for husbands as much as husbands to do for wives. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to all happen all at the same time. It might be that you can't do certain things because of your finances, because of your job, because of your location, because you have young children. But that doesn't mean that you can't be preparing by educating yourself, by taking a class here and another class, one class a semester, getting your degree, so that by the time your children finish with school, you're ready to have a life in which you make use of your talents in whatever God has called that to be for you. So I think that we have, especially as women, a lot of paths, a lot of options, and we can do both, but not necessarily at the same time, all at the same time.
Yeah, and I was thinking about women in my own parish who I love, and
Yes.
I'm not going to mention any names, obviously, so I don't embarrass anybody. But we have one woman who's already raised her family.
Yeah.
But this is a woman who sometimes on Sunday mornings she wakes up at 3 a.m. to prepare several meals to bring to the church because God bless her, she feels like we're all going to starve if she doesn't do that for us.
God
And
bless her is right.
what a beautiful thing she
witness.
does. It's
What a beautiful
an
witness.
act of love to the entire community.
Yes.
Then we
Yes,
have
and how
then we have another
important
woman,
is that? Yes.
in our parish who works and also takes care of her children, is present in most of, if not all of what we have going on in the church.
Yes.
And but is able to work and be part of like two worlds or three worlds,
Yes.
and is present and is always helpful and gathers the community. And actually, I want to read something really quick. Another great book from New Your Own Press, The Perfection of Women in Christ. And the abbess who wrote this book, Abbess Theologia, she says, she's talking about what gifts kind of the women have, and she's saying the woman is not superior in strength, nor necessarily in intellectual abilities, but rather it is because she has a mystical spiritual strength that allows her to influence her environment. She can even turn a wild beast into a lamb if she follows the precepts of the gospel and the admonitions particular to her person. I mean, there are gifts that women have that I think they have more than men in a lot of ways. And so we have those two women, a third woman who stays home, raises her children, and raises them in such a way that she has taught them how to be like lovers of the environment. And, they care. We had a little cricket get into the church the other day, and I pointed out to one of her children, and he wanted to take care of it, instead of a normal kid might want to go and crush it or run away from it or something. He wanted to take care of it and make sure it was safe. And so because this woman has dedicated her life to raising her children at home, so three very different women, and they're all being great Orthodox Christians, great witnesses of Orthodoxy.
That's
And
right.
I think what we have to remember is that the key is that they have the faith in God and use their talents, like you keep mentioning talents. They use their talents the way God gave it to them.
That's right. And isn't it a shame if you decide that the only way to be a good Orthodox woman is to either be an ultra feminist and push for women's rights in the church, or to be an ultra traditionalist and say that you're not a woman or not an Orthodox woman if you don't cover your head and wear baggy clothes to church. I mean, there's something in between, and we should sort of reject these extremes and stereotypes and instead pray for God to guide us for whatever it is that He has called us to do. And all of those things are wonderful, examples of fine Orthodox, women. And I love the idea.
And I'd like
the
to give a
woman-
PSA, by the way, Presbytera. There's so much internet orthodoxy going on out there.
Yes.
I don't think
Yeah.
any woman listening today or anybody, period, should just go on the recommendations of Father Joseph or even Presbytera Genie, but always check with your spiritual father, because
Absolutely.
internet orthodoxy can be dangerous. There are people who have no theological training. They may not have the blessing of their priest or bishop to speak. The first thing I did when I was asked to host the show is I called my metropolitan and made sure that I had actually I saw him in person.
Yes.
I asked to have a blessing. But
Yes.
we should never go against what our spiritual father says just because we heard something
That's right.
online. So
That's
I
right.
want to
That's very
emphasize that.
important. Yes, because people who are online are trying to promote their own views, which they may say, this is orthodoxy. This is what the fathers say. And really, people get sometimes very alarmed because they seem so convincing. They seem like they know what they're talking about, and they may be completely wrong. And so we are supposed to seek the advice of our spiritual father and also of your spouse. So, there are times when we also have to be sensitive to the fact that there may be something that we would really like to do, but it's just not that right time in our life to do it. So there will be times later to develop those talents. I've had people tell me, I want to go and let's say, sometimes it was to be a lawyer. There was one young lady who already had a career as a real estate agent. She was successful in our parish, and she had 3 little kids. She said, I want to go to law school. And I said, you're out of your mind. That will destroy your family. You have no idea how much work that is. Why? Maybe later, when your kids are grown, you can do that. But everything doesn't have to happen right now. Or people say to me, I want to get a PhD in theology. Well, I've got, 3 or 4 kids. And fine, take one course here, and slowly, but you don't suddenly plunge into it as if, we have to be sensible about this. And remember that the house really revolves. When we talked about the kind of influence, which what you were mentioning before, Father, the kind of influence that women have, they can make the home or they can destroy the home by their attitude. And frankly, a stressed woman is not a good thing to have at home. Okay? So when we try to do all these things, we have to be doing that. And if we're adding stress to our lives, that really affects our family. It affects our marriages, and it affects the atmosphere in the home. What we have to do, first of all, is make sure that our home is a place of love and warmth and comfort that's centered around Christ. This is our most important thing. We can achieve all kinds of other things, but if we lose our family because we were so busy pursuing these other things that we thought we needed to be doing, then God is going to judge us for that. And that includes involvement in the church. Sometimes there are people who are so involved in the church that they're neglecting their home, and sometimes it's a kind of escape. So we have to be very careful.
I've told people to do a little less in the church, although I appreciate their help in order to be with their families. And some people would want to be there even for Orthros, which is a great thing, but they would do it at the expense of, they'd leave their kids home because they don't want to be there for 2 hours. I say,
that's right.
Come for liturgy then. Bring your kids.
That's exactly right. Later, they can come to Orthros. So everything doesn't have to be right now, but that's the most important
And you said
thing.
something beautiful, I think, just to kind of go over it again. We should find fulfillment in the things that God has given us and asked us to be good stewards of. And so that sometimes means to find fulfillment in our children. That takes some humility, because, of course, I want to do many great things, and I want to travel and all these different things.
That's right.
But that might not be the right thing right now. Maybe later.
That's right. There are so many.
The last thing.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
There are only so many hours in the day. There are only so many days in the year, and we can do many things in our lives, but not all at the same time. So I will tell people, that's great. You have kids, raise your kids, read, learn, help in the parish, develop yourself, and maybe you'll be able to do this when you're 40 or 50. There's nothing wrong with that. So everything doesn't have to be done now, especially not at the expense of our children and our families and our marriages. That's the most important thing, because you can't be a successful person in life if you have really neglected the most important thing that God has called us to do. Go ahead, Father.
Yes. By the way, I apologize for interrupting you. There's just a very slight delay.
There's a delay.
And
I
so sometimes I think
Father.
that you are done talking and I start talking over you. So I apologize.
That's okay,
Forgive
Father.
me.
I understand.
The last thing I really want to talk about, which would be remiss if we don't talk about, I think, what I call the crown of womanhood, which is motherhood. And this is one of those things that is uniquely woman, belongs to women. A man cannot be a mother. And so if we can talk just a little bit about motherhood. And one thing I tell people, sometimes I have young couples that want to get married, and they say something to the effect of, well, we're not going to have children now, or sometimes we're planning on never having children. That worries me because, first of all, children are a gift from God. And can you imagine God wants to give you a gift and you say, no, thank you. I don't want your gift. That's ludicrous. Second of all, the benefit of being a mother, how it changes you. It's such a blessing. And this is part of what God has planned really from the beginning, is for women to become mothers. He tells Adam and Eve, go forth and multiply. We could get into what that means before the fall and after the fall, but never mind. But do you see, well, obviously there's a benefit to motherhood, but if this is a calling to be married, should women try and prevent motherhood, or is this something to be embraced, and to embrace even the challenges and the difficulties of it?
Okay, so first of all, the church teaches that to be just having decided that you don't ever want children is wrong, and that's a sin. So there's no debating that. And I think that any couple that thinks that way really is very, very misguided and really cutting themselves off from a lot of grace. So that's considered a sin. Now, planning children for when you feel that you're prepared for that, either emotionally or physically, because there are many, many factors. These are things that we're supposed to discuss with our spiritual father, and to make that kind of a decision. Some people say, listen, I'll take as many children, and whenever they come, that's great. Others try, and no, they don't have them. I wanted 4. I only got 1. And I had 2 pregnancies. In the first pregnancy, I nearly died. And after that, I had a lot of difficulty. So we don't know what's happening in each individual case, and it's not for us to judge. And I actually had somebody say to me, you only have 1 child. And she assumed that I had 1 child by choice because I was like a career woman. I said, are you kidding? I nearly died from the first pregnancy. It was a very dangerous pregnancy. And, I didn't want just 1 child, but that's what God gave me. And I'm grateful. And that's what I have. So we have to be open to
on that note, real quick, I think we have to be very careful, especially us ethnic people. We like to get into each other's businesses and things. And we have to be very sensitive asking women about, especially a newly married couple, when are you going to have children? This question can be very painful. So just a PSA
don't do
to
that.
tell
Just
people, mind your own business and don't ask these questions. Maybe the priest can talk to them about it. But.
Yeah, and no, and don't ask because you don't know. For a number of years, we were married for 12 years before Christopher came along, and people just assume either you don't want them, you don't know. It's such a personal thing, and it's a very thing. So I would say to anybody that being a parent is the best spiritual lesson. It's the best way to learn the love of God, to learn humility, to learn sacrifice, because that baby doesn't care if you're sick or you're tired or whatever. And you better answer it, and you better take care of it, whether you feel up to it or not. So there is something so special about the bond, about the intimacy, about the lessons that you learn. um, as a
And
parent.
there's a parallel even to monastic life where the monastics maybe wake up in the middle of the night to do their prayers while the parent wakes up in the middle of the night to tend
To
to
care
their
for the
child.
child.
I mean, there's a similar
That's right.
sacrifice.
The
Um,
sacrifices that you make, yeah,
and,
they're
and you talked
tremendous life
about,
lessons.
yes, sorry, go
I'll
ahead.
just share one thing. I'll just share one thing with you about that. I remember once when Christopher, our boy, was little, like 3 or 4, and he kept doing the same thing over and over that I told him not to do, and I got so annoyed. And I said to myself, "But isn't that what we do to God? We say, God, I'm not going to do that sin anymore." Then we do it again and again and again, and we learn the patience of God, the love of God, the willingness of you would do anything for your child. You
And our
cross the
children
ocean. You
expose our own sinfulness before our faces too.
we see them doing
I
something. We
tell,
say, yeah. We say,
yeah,
why did they
I
do
tell
that?
people all the time that when a child
That's right.
is under 8 years old, they don't sin.
Yeah.
They're just copying, imitating the sins of their parents, and so we get to see a mirror of our own sin.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
you talked about barrenness real quick, and
Yeah.
I call barrenness a calling, the calling of barrenness, because we've had
Mm.
some saints who have been barren, some who were barren at first and then been blessed with children.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
women who are barren, there's a special blessing, I think, also in that. First of all, it's a humility. And we remember Joachim and Anna felt like
Yeah.
almost ashamed,
Yes.
um,
Yes. Yes. Yes.
which we shouldn't feel
Yeah.
ashamed. This is God
Right.
has, I think, called certain people to this, and the woman doesn't hold this burden by herself. It should be shared by her husband, but it
Yeah.
also allows women who are barren to do special things. One of those special things.
Father, I would use the word infertile if I were
Okay,
you.
okay,
Barren is a
infertile.
biblical word. Barren is a biblical word, but it was specifically directed toward the woman. And now we know that sometimes ability is also can also to the man.
Good point.
So
Good point.
for whatever
So
reason,
we'll say infertility.
yeah, it is
Yeah,
a very painful thing because I went through that myself, so I do understand it very well. Yeah. So I think that
sure.
that's true, and there's a special, I think that I know a presbytera, a one person. They have a husband, have no children, but she is like a mother to every child in that parish. I watch her with amazement. And I know she longs to have her own children now that she's over 40. I don't think it happened. I've prayed for her for a long time, and I hoped it would happen for her. She would be a wonderful mother. But she is a mother to the kids in that parish like I've never seen. And honestly,
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because some of us will never be mothers, but we have godchildren. We can be godmothers and raise them in the faith, even to other adults. We can be special aunts. Everybody needs a loving aunt
And
to
those
get away
aren't
from your
lesser
parents.
things either.
They aren't. They're so important because we had those things in our lives. A friend, a trusted adult in your life, because sometimes children want to get away from their parents or they have a problem and maybe their parents are telling them something. You will tell them the same exact advice, but they will listen to you when they just ignored their parents. So there is such a power in being that special person in a young person's life as a role model. You should never discount that. It's so important. So because yes, not everybody
Yeah.
will be a mom or a dad, and I had already resigned myself to that I was just going to be a great aunt for my nieces and nephews, and along came Christopher as a miracle. But
Yeah.
you know,
And that's
we're
not to
very
mention, opportunities for adoption, for spiritual motherhood.
yes,
Um,
yes,
and like you said, like a mother, I always say that too when I'm speaking on Mother's Day or something. I pray for all of the
yes,
mothers, grandmothers, godmothers, and like a mothers, because we
yeah,
underestimate that like a mother, how powerful it is. And,
yes,
teachers
yes,
are types of mothers. So
yes,
there's so many different ways that comes out. And I don't want anyone
yeah,
who is infertile to think that they can't be mothers, or in that case, fathers either. Um,
That's
I
true.
think it's
We how badly do we need good men as role models for young men today? Maybe more than we need good women as role models for girls. I had an aunt, you talked about like a mother. She never had any children, but she loved us and gave us things and sacrificed and called me to, how are you doing? She was like my mother after my mom died.
Yeah.
And I had a couple of aunts like that, that we knew that no matter what, we could count on Aunt so and so to love us and support us and help us and be there for us. And I can't tell you how important that was. And she did this for all of her nieces and nephews. So
Yeah, and I have an aunt like that too. They're invaluable.
Absolutely. And I pray for her every single day for her soul. Okay, so,
Yeah, beautiful.
I'm glad you say that. And it's important that we say that, Father. The Leica mothers are so important in our lives.
Yeah, beautiful. And I can tell even you're getting emotional thinking about it. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
The last thing we did go over, but we started a little late because of everything.
Yes,
The last
Father, I'm
question
sorry.
I kind of want to ask you. So the spiritual father can advise individual women, but not all
Yes.
are the same. So yes, women should have children, for example, but each individual situation should talk to the spiritual father, as you mentioned.
Yes. Yes.
And their situations are all different. Somebody may have had a very difficult pregnancy where they almost died, and they may come to the priest and ask, do I need to have more children? Would I be upsetting God if I don't? But they, maybe they could possibly die according to their own doctor's advice, and maybe then the child that they do have would be motherless, so that's something to consider. So there are all these things. Have you ever, or maybe what advice can you give us on this? Should women feel embarrassed by getting spiritual advice from a priest who is a man? And what's, maybe if you feel comfortable sharing your own experience of having a spiritual father, are there things you can't discuss with him?
No, I don't think women should be embarrassed. They have to remember that, I've had a lot of women come to me to talk to me about things that were going on of a personal nature. That's kind of common for the priest's wife, but I always encourage them to go and talk to Father. Usually that has to do with menstruation or things like this, having to do with that kind of a thing. They were embarrassed to talk to Father. But we have to remember that priests hear all kinds of confessions. They are experienced in helping people through all kinds of difficulties. And she should not be embarrassed, certainly, to talk about these things. It is part of our life, whether or not we choose, when we choose to have children, what kinds of, circumstances, when maybe we're afraid or we're not able to, or we want to, we just had one and we're not ready to have another baby in the family. I think that this is something that they need to talk to their spiritual father about and not be, I've never felt embarrassed to discuss having children. Of course, I didn't have the problem of having too many. I had the problem of not having any. So, but no, that I don't think so. I don't think they should ever be embarrassed to discuss that. And that's not, they're, I mean, a lot of things we do are much more embarrassing than that sins we have to confess. That's not even really a sin. So I don't know why she would be embarrassed to discuss it.
Yeah, and I was talking about anything in general. Are there things that women,
no.
I mean, should you trust your spiritual father with everything, or should you, being that he's a man, shy away from talking to him about certain things?
No, I think that, no, we're supposed to trust him with everything. Absolutely. We're supposed to divulge everything. And if we don't if we go to confession and we withhold something, a sin, and not confess it, it is as though the confession never took place. So no, we have to trust that our spiritual father, if you are not comfortable with your spiritual father, first of all, try it. If you're a little bit embarrassed to bring it up, you can say to him, Father, I'm a little bit embarrassed to tell you about this. Talk to him about it. He's going to encourage you. You can find a way to get the words out, talk about it, and you should really not be ashamed. And once you open that discussion, it's like with your doctor. Sometimes we're embarrassed to talk to doctors about very private things, but we know that we need to, so we do. So it should really be the same way with a priest. Especially most
As an
of our priests are
encouragement
married.
to,
So.
yeah, as an encouragement to anybody listening, from my own experience as a priest, I've never thought less
Yes.
of anyone who's confessed anything. I've only loved and respected people more, knowing what their struggles
More.
are, and knowing
It's
how
difficult.
even
Yeah.
through the embarrassment, they value the forgiveness of sins and their souls more than
That's
the
right.
embarrassment. And so I always have more
That's
respect
right.
for people who are able to do that.
Yeah, people
Prince
think
Utera, I
that
want to
the
thank you
priest.
so. Yeah.
Okay, Father, go ahead. They think that the
I
priest
just
is
wanted to
sometimes
thank you
because
very much for being on the program here today. I know we went
my
quite a
time's
bit
gone.
over our time, and I really appreciate you being on here. I'm sure we're going to have you again sometime.
Thank you,
I'd
Father.
also like to thank all of the viewers for watching, and if you enjoyed this program, please subscribe to the channel and like and share the video so that in your own little way you can become an apostle for Jesus. In
There you go.
November, we are having a special two-part series on the history of Palestine in the centuries leading up to Christ. It's a fascinating topic that would help explain the circumstances leading up to Christ's birth. So be on the lookout for information on that. And until then, the blessing of the Lord be upon you. Have a good night.
Thank you, Father.